What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Enjoying the Review. I'm your host, Incomparable Zach Jones, and if you couldn't tell by my sweet, sweet t-shirt here, it's that time, guys. By the time this video is over, you will believe a man can review Superman, specifically 2025 Superman, James Gunn Superman, and the kickoff to the new DC universe. All right, guys. Today I'm going to be giving not only a non-spoiler review, but also a very in-depth spoiler review. And guys, when I say spoiler review, I mean it. I'm going to go and give a very detailed scene by scene, detailed plot analysis, spoiler review that you don't get in a lot of other, quote unquote spoiler reviews. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Guys, let's get right into it. So these are my non-spoiler thoughts, and fear not, I will give a solid spoiler warning before I get into anything spoiler-rific. All right, guys, you know what? I'm going to start off with the score. A lot of people like to string along and then give you the score. I'm going to mix things up a bit. I'm going to give you my score off the top, and I'm happy to report I really enjoyed this film. I am going to give it an 8 out of 10. I thought this was very solid and very much liked. So why did I? Well, the key to any Superman movie is getting Lois and Clark correct. And I'm happy to report I think James Gunn did just that. David Corenswet, I think, does a great job with Clark / Superman. Kind of reminds me of Christopher Reeve in that, Clark is very stumbly and bumbly. But then, he almost turns on a switch when he's Superman a little bit. And I'll say this, I really like Rachel Brosnahan as Lois, but I kind of think the movie doesn't use her as well as it could. She's not as important to this movie as I think she should be, even though she is in a fair amount of it. And also, I would have liked to get more of their relationship in this movie. I think this movie could have used a little more romance, in my opinion. One thing I really like about the original Iron Man is it's kind of a low-key, romantic comedy mixed in with a superhero movie. You get a lot of kind of flirtations with Tony and Pepper, and I think I could have used a little more of that in this movie. If this movie does well, and I think it's going to, and we get a sequel, I want to see a little more. I hope they don't put their relationship on the back burner. I want to see a little more romance between those two than we got in this movie. But as far as characterizations, I think they did a good job. I wrote down, Gunn understands Superman, and people who agree with the common criticisms of Man of Steel will like the uncompromising optimism and tone of this version of Superman. And I believe that. And by the way, I want to say, I'm a Man of Steel fan. I wouldn't go as far as to call myself a Snyder bro or anything. I think a lot of people that don't like Man of Steel are dismissive about people that do like it. And look, I agree with some of the common criticisms of Man of Steel. They just don't, overall sour the movie on me or break my enjoyment of the movie. I think Man of Steel is great. I really love it. And even though if I had my druthers, he wouldn't make the same decision he makes at the end of Man of Steel, within the context of Man of Steel, I think it makes sense that he would make that decision, even though I don't necessarily agree with it. And, Superman should be allowed to fail, and that he actually becomes a more interesting character if he's allowed to fail. Although, speaking of Man of Steel, I did write, this movie goes out of the way to imply that no citizens are hurt, which seems unlikely and possibly an overcorrection to the Man of Steel criticisms. Now, I get, the tone this movie is going for. You might not want to see swaths of people, getting hurt or possibly dying. But that being said, there's certain things that happen in this movie where it's just like, it's kind of unbelievable that, a lot of people, didn't get hurt / killed. And so, you know, to me, one of the interesting things about Superman is he can't save everybody. He can't be everywhere at once. He'd love to, he strives to, but he can't. And so, you know, implying that, just, nobody, or I'll get into it in spoilers, mostly nobody gets hurt. It's just maybe a little unbelievable. I don't know. I wrote, this feels very relevant given current political events. It's interesting. A couple months ago, I reviewed Daredevil Born Again. And one thing I noticed is that despite the fact that it was written and shot before, kind of the current political climate, it was very relevant to what's going on in the world right now. And somehow, some way, this movie kind of did the same thing. I don't know exactly how the timing rolls out as far as shooting, but what I'll say is, without spoiling, there's kind of a geopolitical event that happens in the movie that's very akin to the Israel-Gaza situation that's going on in our world. But I have to imagine James Gunn would have at least written this movie kind of before that conflict picked up again in the way it has recently. But the comparisons are kind of startling. Of course, in this movie, we see someone not only have the right response to a situation like that, but has the power to act on it. And, that's kind of refreshing to see. Also, I would say, you'll see parallels between the way immigrants have been treated lately in our world and in this movie. Again, not. I see a lot of people complaining online this movie is maybe too political, and I disagree with that. I think there's something in it. Superhero movies, if you boil them down, are essentially good versus evil, and also vigilante justice, and those things. There's going to be inherent political thing, embedded within that. And Superman specifically has always been political, which I know a million people online have already pointed out. So I won't say much more about the politics surrounding the movie, but I actually thought the things in the movie paralleling things that are going on today made the movie feel very relevant, and I actually enjoyed that. So it won't be for everyone, I guess, but I did. Okay, without spoiling again, there's a part of this movie that actually kind of changes a part of Superman lore that I think has been present in pretty much every Superman comic or adaptation I've ever consumed. And I think a lot of Superman purists may not like it, but I actually found it pretty interesting. And so I'm down with the spin, and I'll be happy to talk about it more once we get into spoilers. I also want to talk about the kind of extended cast in this movie. So we got and this isn't a spoiler. I think this is in one of the trailers or something. The Justice Gang. I wrote the Justice Gang / JLI members because it's very obvious that James Gunn takes a lot of inspiration from the JLI, Justice League International comics from like the late 80s, early 90s. And so I wrote all of those characters and actors do a good job, but are maybe a little self-indulgent, given that they're really only there because James Gunn loves them and he loves that run of comics, and possibly introduced too early in this universe. This is something, and maybe I'll be proven wrong on this, but when you're starting a shared universe like this, I kind of think it's smart to start very, very slow as far as character introductions. Instead of just being like, oh, here's a movie and here's all these kind of more obscure characters. And like most of these characters in this movie, I wouldn't call Z-list DC characters, but, B, C-list characters. And a part of me is just like, maybe it would have been better to wait and have this be a very bare bones, just Superman movie, and then kind of more slowly introduce, you know, uh, more extraneous characters from the DCU. But then again, I don't know. Gunn might prove me wrong. Again, I all these characters were great. It's just I kind of question whether they were necessary this early on. But we'll see. We'll keep tabs on that. I don't think I would want solo movies featuring any of these characters. Again, I like these characters, but I didn't see any of them be like, oh man, that character needs a solo movie. I think they do work best as an ensemble, in a movie like this. Okay, I want to talk about another supporting cast of characters, the supporting cast of the Daily Planet. Now, I think most of these characters, so we got the Cat Grant, Steve Lombard, Perry White, Jimmy Olsen. I think they're all cast well. I just think, for the most part, in this movie, unfortunately, they're more or less set dressing. They're not given a lot to do. Jimmy's given a little bit to do, but unfortunately, especially, I really like Wendell Pierce as Perry White, but he's not given much to do. A part of me, I would really like almost like a Sorkin-esque walk and talk through like a busy bullpen of the Daily Planet, and Perry White as the chief is giving out assignments to Lois and Clark and telling Jimmy to go along and take photos or something. I just almost like a movie that centered around the journalism aspect. More. I think most people, it's probably good that James Gunn is in charge and did not do a movie like that, because most people would probably be like, this is too boring or something. But I don't know. I think I would enjoy more scenes like that. Let's talk about the engineer. I wrote the engineer has cool powers, which look cool on screen, but the character does not have much depth, at least not in this movie, unfortunately. I think this character in this movie is basically just a villain for villain's sake. Just seems like a mustache twirling villain. Or not even that, because we really never find out much about the engineer in this movie. But she's just a villain just because, it seems like. And so I hope if they do an Authority movie, and the engineer is part of the Authority, I hope she's given more depth in that movie. And if they eventually have their plans are always in flux, but if their ultimate goal is to possibly do a Justice League versus Authority movie, in my opinion, if done right, the Authority should not be written in that movie as villains. They should be written as antagonists. They might do things we disagree with, but we see their side of the story. We see their point, and they make good points. That should be the way the Authority is written, in my opinion. Speaking of villains, I wrote just generally, none of the villains are quite as interesting as I would have liked. Again, the engineer has no depth. There's another villain that I won't spoil that has no depth. Lex Luthor, while I think well played by Nicholas Hoult, he has more depth, I guess, but the thing is in this movie, he's already kind of fully formed Lex Luthor. And I think we missed something there. I think I would have preferred the first movie. Lex Luthor should be kind of a minor character, but we can see he's maybe pulling the strings of whoever the big bad in the movie is. And this maybe sets him up to be the big bad in a sequel. In fact, I wrote, this movie felt like it could have been a sequel to a first movie we never got in many ways. And I think that was done purposely because James Gunn probably figures, everybody knows the origin of Superman. I don't need to dwell on it at all. We can just hit the ground running. I get that to an extent, but there's also things in this movie that I enjoyed and was like, you know what? I think I kind of would have liked to seen, like Superman, instance, this version of Clark Kent, I kind of think, you know what? I kind of would have liked to seen him start at the Daily Planet and him first meet Lois Lane and all that kind of stuff and see how we got to this point rather than just be told we're at this point. I don't know. I kind of felt like something was, and again with Lex Luthor, I think he could have benefited by like I was saying, like if he was in a movie that took place before this one, and we got a taste of him and seen how he kind of developed into the Lex Luthor we have here. In many ways, this feels like a sequel for some reason to me. I don't know. It's weird. But that being said, I still did very much enjoy it. And the last point I want to make in the non-spoiler section is I was a little let down by the musical score in this movie. Now, Man of Steel, again, I don't want to always compare to Man of Steel, but to me, Man of Steel, that Hans Zimmer score in Man of Steel is one of the best movie scores of all time. I love that score. I still listen to it very regularly. I could tell by the trailers that this movie was going to pay homage to the iconic John Williams dun, 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 Superman score. And I get that. It's a legendary score. But at the same time, I think they're too beholden to that. And I liked that Man of Steel was like, hey, we're going to do our own thing. And they found magic in that Hans Zimmer score. And I wish they would have done the same here. I think, win or lose, I wish they would have just been like, you know what? That's a legendary score. But we're going to try. This is our Superman. This is our score. We're going to try our own thing. But this score is also disappointing because to me, if you listen to the trailer and you kind of hear that cover they did a John Williams score, but the more bombastic sting they did, that's kind of the only interesting part of the score in this movie to me. The rest is kind of forgettable and just feels like your standard scores you'll hear in a lot of other movies that don't really stick with you. So I was a little let down by the musical score overall. But guys, like I said, the important stuff, the Lois and Clark of it all was nailed, in my opinion. I didn't mention Crypto. Also, Crypto may be a little self-indulgent on James Gunn's part too, but he's going to put a smile on your face. I don't know. I still, if you love dogs, it's hard not to like Crypto. He's just so lovable in this movie and provides a lot of comic relief and just, I think, works very well. So I like that aspect of it as well. But yeah, all the things you want them to get right work. And also I think the pacing in this movie is very well. This movie cooks, man. It just, you never feel bored in this movie. Everything kind of flows together nicely. I think it was edited very well, and it just kind of flows. And Superman always feels like Superman. And I think all the major characters feel like they should feel. So props to James Gunn. I think this was a very good kickoff to the DCU, and I'm now very excited to see what comes next. So yeah, my final score, 8 out of 10. Guys, this is worth seeing in the theater if you haven't already. Don't wait for this to hit streaming. Go out, lay down your ducats, see this in the theaters. All right, guys, with that out of the way, let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's get into spoiler country. So I just was talking about the John Williams score. Well, this movie opens with that new Superman DC logo with Superman breaking out of the chains. And we get that familiar score there. So the movie opens up, and maybe one of you nerds out there answer this. Is Superman's fortress in the Arctic or the Antarctic? Either way, we start in one of those places. Snow on the ground, guys. And we get a bunch of text, which provides some context for both this movie and possibly the whole DCU world. So unfortunately, I should tell everybody off the bat. So my notes are taken from nothing but my memory. So if I that leave some scenes out or get some stuff in slightly the wrong order, forgive me. But I think I'm going to hit all the high points here, guys. So give me a little slack. Um, but we get several chains of text, and I didn't remember all of them. Unfortunately, my memory's not quite that good. It's not a steel trap, but I got a lot of them. So it says 300 years ago. Again, this isn't verbatim. But it's the gist. Metahumans came to Earth and started an era of gods and monsters, which of course is what James Gunn is calling this first phase of DCU movies, gods and monsters. This was interesting. Saying that 300 years ago, that makes me wonder if like the Wonder Woman, movie is gonna tie into that. Like, um, it makes you think that something is going to be set in the past and kind of expound upon that. So that's interesting. It says 30 years ago, an aircraft carrying an alien baby crash landed in Nebraska. Again, probably not exactly the way it was written, but it's saying Superman crash landed on it. And then I think it says 3 years ago, Superman introduced himself to the world and started fighting the good fight. I don't know exactly what the text was, but it was something to that effect of Superman introducing himself to the world. And then I think I missed one in here, but like either 3 months or 3 weeks ago, Superman prevented a war between these two fictional DC countries. So there's like Bolivaria, and then I'm not going to lie. The other one I can't even try to pronounce. But you can kind of think of it, like I was referencing in my non-spoiler review. Bolivaria kind of comes off as an Israel kind of country, while the other one is Palestine. So Superman prevented a war between those countries. I think it says 3 hours ago, Metropolis was attacked or something to that effect. And then 3 minutes ago, Superman lost his first fight to a man known as the Bolivarian Hammer. Okay, so it kind of gives you a lot out of the gate here, a lot of information. So now it starts. Superman gets knocked into the snow and is badly hurt. And again, this is the scene from one of the trailers. And it showed almost this full scene in one of the trailers where, Superman's kind of beat up, bloodied. He's in the snow. And what does he do? He whistles and for Krypto to come save him. So Krypto shows up, and of course, Krypto is not the best behaving of dog. So he kind of like jumps on him and kind of hurts him a little bit. But eventually he's like, Krypto, home, gives him his cape. Krypto pulls him. So Krypto, I wrote, playfully jumps on Superman and hurts him before taking him home to the Fortress of Solitude, which pops up automatically out of the earth because we'll find out it is keyed to Superman's DNA, which will be a plot point going forward. Superman's robots, the lead of which is voiced by Alan Tudyk, they play a message from Superman's birth parents because it calms him. So this is something that's happened in the past. And so we get a message from Jor-El and Lara. And Bradley Cooper plays Jor-El. And I'm honestly not familiar with the actress that played Lara here. But the thing is, this message only plays part way because the message was damaged when Clark's ship crash landed, and so he could never hear the end of the message, which, once this exposition, I think, happened between the robots, that was the case, I'm like, oh, some point in this movie, we're going to find out what the rest of that message says, and sure enough. And in the message, they say something to the effect that they're sending Clark to the Earth so that he may flourish and change the world. I don't know if I have that exactly right, but again, it's something to that effect. So they expose Superman to the yellow sun, which kind of heals him up, and he's like, okay, I got to go back to Metropolis and get back in the fight. And I think the robot's like, hey, you're only like 83% healed or whatever. But he's Superman. He's got to do it. We see that this mysterious engineer has followed Superman to the Fortress of Solitude. But as she tries to enter it, the fortress, it sinks back into the ground. And we also find out that she is in league with Lex Luthor. She's on the radio with Lex Luthor, and he's like, it's fine. Come back for now. So speaking of Lex Luthor, Superman comes back and he starts getting in a fist fight with this kind of armored up guy, this Hammer Bolivaria. And we find out that Lex Luthor is in the ear of this guy, the Hammer, and he is giving him fight moves to beat Superman with. Because now I will say there is a lot of exposition in this movie. Like one of Lex Luthor's men is like, how is he doing this? And the other one's like, oh, he's been watching Superman for years. He knows his every move in combat. So Lex Luthor basically jotted down all these combat maneuvers, and so he's like 5A, and so that means that the Bolivarian Hammer here will punch in a certain way, and this was maybe a little bit silly, but it does show you that Lex is obsessed with Superman, so it kind of does the job of exploring Lex in that way. But at the same time, I'm like, really, this is what he does to take Superman out? But okay. So eventually, because of this, the Hammer does win the fight, slams Superman into the earth, and he tells Superman not to interfere with Bolivaria ever again. So the Hammer flies to a military base. It's actually, I guess, a private base owned by Lex Luthor, but it kind of looks like a military base. It's got his soldiers. And then randomly, a bunch of people in Hawaiian shirts who I guess are engineers and people scientists that work for him. And he walks through what kind of looks like a boom tube, which transports him first to this, what we'll find out is a pocket dimension. And then he goes through another one of these tubes. Again, it's not exactly a boom tube, but it accomplishes the same goal. It transports a person from one place to a long distance away. So he then goes in another tube, and it brings him right into Lex Luthor's, LexCorp building. I'm not sure if it's revealed here or a little bit later, but it's revealed that this Bolivarian Hammer guy, he eventually comes out of the suit, and he's this guy wearing a mask with a U on his chest, and Lex calls him Ultraman. Now, of course, in the comic books, Ultraman is an evil version of Superman that comes from Earth 3, where there's basically a whole evil Justice League. And I actually think it would be interesting to make them villains in a future Justice League movie. But now that they've done this here, I don't know if that means maybe they won't be doing that. I don't know. Because actually we'll find out, towards the end of the movie, that this is actually a swerve, because it ends up kind of being a different DC villain. But we'll save that for a minute. So later on, now it switches over to Clark. Clark is, doing his clumsily walk to the Daily Planet, and kind of reminiscent of Christopher Reeve's performance here, where he would be clumsy when he was Clark, but then stoic when he was Superman. He gets a call from his parents, and I don't know who they got to play the mom here, but she is very much comes off as like a southern hayseed type, and she's like kind of yelling into the speakerphone at Clark, like she doesn't exactly know how the phone works, that sort of thing. They really want to, you know, show you that these are country folk. And his dad's also there, wishing him good luck and everything. Um, then we're introduced to Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, and they talk about a piece that Clark wrote. And Lois mentions how it's peculiar that he gets such good interviews with Superman. And I didn't know where they were going with this, because when I looked at the trailers, it looked like, oh, they're already in a relationship. But then when she did this line, I'm like, oh, are they going to do this where, she doesn't know yet, but she's going to find out in this movie? And then it was a bit of a swerve, because we'll find out soon later that no, she did already know. And this is kind of what I was hinting at in my non-spoiler review. It's not getting enough of their relationship. I'm actually kind of sad that we never got the meet cute. I don't know. There's something about that period of time before she figures out that he's Superman that I just enjoy the chase. Where like she thinks he's this like, country hick who probably isn't cut out for this life. And then there's the change when she realizes, oh, this guy's actually a really good reporter and a real decent guy. And she kind of falls it. She's kind of enamored with Superman, but then she falls for Clark, and then she puts it together. And I know we've seen that before, but it's just it's just that's kind of a story I never get tired of, and I kind of would have liked to see James Gunn spin on that part of their courtship and I don't know, I would have liked. That's what I was saying in my non-spoiler review, how this felt like a sequel to an original movie we never got, and I would have liked to seen that original movie, where they have that. I think the only thing is there, if it takes Lois too long to figure out he's Superman, it kind of buries her a little bit. But you don't have to play it out long enough that it would bury her intelligence. But I don't know. I kind of miss not seeing that part of the relationship. Okay. So now we move to a meeting with Lex Luthor, Rick Flag Sr., who we saw the animated version of in Creature Commandos, and some other government officials. And Lex Luthor is basically trying to sell these guys on, hey, Superman's a danger, and you should hire me and my team to keep him and other metahumans in check. And so he makes this security company, I think he calls it Planet Side, which is comprised of the engineer. And again, this would be a slight criticism. A lot of exposition here where he's like, this is the engineer. I pumped her full of nanites, and she can now turn those nanites into anything, and she can, turn them into any sort of projectile that she wishes. And I'm like, when he did that line, I was like, okay, that's a little expository, but okay, we know who she is now. And then there's Ultraman, and then there's his flying soldiers, who I think he calls like Raptors or something like that. I might have that wrong, but he's got kind of like the Lex Luthor battle suit we see in a lot of comics and things. They're using suits like that. So one of the government officials says they cannot do anything until they have solid proof, that Superman has harmful intent. So, Lex Luthor, his brain starts firing away. We know that's his next goal. So Lois enters her apartment, And she hears a noise, so she grabs a bat. And I wrote, for some reason, she's surprised to find Clark there cooking for her, even though it's now revealed that they've been in a relationship for about 3 months. So it's like, why would it, like, if she hears a noise, why wouldn't her first thought be like, oh, that's probably my boyfriend Clark, who has been to my apartment several times? And, rather than, oh, it's probably someone here to do me harm. I don't know. It just seemed a little silly. But anyway, Clark decides to let Lois interview him as Superman, which we saw in one of the trailers. Now, this was a good scene, a really good scene, but it was also very long, and so I can't remember the entire back and forth they had here. But part of it is Lois questions if it was a good idea for him to unilaterally get involved in the Bolivaria, conflict. And should he have had that right? And he's basically like, yells at her, people were going to get hurt. Like, what would you have me do? People were going to die. And she's like, hey, I understand that, but like, I would have questioned it, and also as an added wrinkle, she even puts in a line where like, the other country aren't exactly angels. They have some bad positions, which, that is a direct, I think even if James Gunn's script was finished before the most recent Israel-Palestine conflict kicked off, that line might have been added afterwards, or he just was already thinking of them as the analog here, because like that kind of explains the whole Israel-Gaza situation. It's like a one-to-one analogy, so I think that was definitely put in there purposefully, and it worked. I liked it. So this eventually leads them to get in a fight, and Clark says, he starts to walk out, and Lois says, I knew this wouldn't work. But then, and I like this touch, Clark walks out, and then Lois seems disappointed, like maybe she thought he was going to come back and they were going to sort things out. So I like that little touch there. So now we move back over to Lex Luthor. So the engineer brings Lex and Ultraman to the spot where the fortress pops up, and for some reason it opens up for Lex, and we will find out later on why that is. Ultraman and the engineer easily dispose of Superman's robots, but I did really like this scene. I wrote there was some cool action where the engineer turns her hands into buzzsaws. I think she visually, what she does, things she does in this movie is really cool. Because, yeah, she does that. She turns her hands into buzzsaws. And she even can, like, basically, like, she also, like, kind of reverses her body. Like, she's looking one way, but then she, like, the nanites go together and she, is now looking the other way. And, like, there's just a lot of cool visual things that they do with her in this movie that I think work really well. So now Crypto, because he was left in the fortress, he shows up to protect the fortress and fights them, but the engineer is able to basically cover his head in nanites and choke him out, which is also going to come into play later on. Lex has the engineer hook up to Superman's computer and download his files. And they find the file of his parents talking and believe they can restore what it originally said. And, like, I gotta say, I did, once we found out that file was damaged, like I said, I was like, oh, we're going to find out what the rest of that says. So Lex says he has a plan to keep Superman busy while they are stealing, all his files from the fortress. So now we cut to two of Lex's henchmen letting out a small creature into Metropolis. And apparently somebody fed this little guy after midnight or something, because within hours, this creature is now an enormous, like, kaiju, like, lizard monster. I kind of wonder if this character is out of a comic. If anybody knows, chime in the comics. I'm not sure, or in the comments down below. I'm not sure. But Superman fights this creature, and again, he's very careful not to harm any civilians. So, like, the monster's going to step on someone, Superman goes underneath, catches the foot. Or actually, it was a dog, and he blows the dog out of the way, and then it stomps him down, and he comes back out of the rubble on the street. At one point, he, like, saves this girl from, like, a bunch of these, like, metal canisters that are knocked her way. He stops the monster from backing into a building. The monster launches fire at the building, and he makes sure none of the people got burned. Although at one point, the monster, like, sideswipes a bunch of cars with his tail. And I'm like, are we just to believe that all those cars were empty and nobody was in those and got, like, hurt or smashed or killed? That's the kind of thing I was referencing in my non-spoiler review. I'm like, somebody got seriously hurt, if not many people. So eventually, the Justice Gang, comprised of Mr. Terrific, Guy Gardner, Green Lantern, and Hot Girl, show up to help. Mr. Terrific tells Superman that this thing has a really hard exterior, so they have to go after the monster's soft spots, like his eyes. Superman says he does not want to kill the creature. He wants to put it somewhere safe, so that will also allow them to study it. And Mr. Terrific scoffs at that idea. He's like, my man, like, basically saying, like, we got to put this thing down. Like, we don't have much of a choice here. So Green Lantern and Hot Girl try to get into the creature's eyes, but fail. There's actually kind of a nasty scene where Green Lantern uses a construct to open up the creature's eyeball and then, like, stab it repeatedly in the eye, which is kind of nasty. But ultimately, they can't get in. But eventually, Mr. Terrific detonates some of his T-spheres inside the creature's stomach and kills it, much to Superman's disappointment. I think Superman in that fight even, like, saves the squirrel. Like, they really want to. I think some people might find this movie a little too saccharine at points, things like that. But to me, I'm like, that's Superman, so it doesn't bother me. Suddenly, a bunch of news reports start playing. Lex Luthor is on a news show, kind of like a Fox News type show, and shows the full video of Superman's parents. Okay, change in lore. In this video, his parents say they sent him to Earth so he could, flourish, but also so he could repopulate the world with his, DNA and take over the world. So they basically want him to be a conqueror, to take a harem of women, have a bunch of kids, and take over this world. So, basically, Jor-El and Lara are not the loving parents you see in almost every other Superman adaptation, and certainly the comics. They're, fascistic, and they have a superiority complex when it comes to Kryptonians, and thinks they have the right to take over the universe, And so I thought that was an interesting change to the Superman lore. I'm sure there are diehard Superman fans that won't like that change, but I think it's interesting. And also, what would have happened if that file wasn't damaged? Like, if a younger Superman heard that message in full, would that have changed who he became? Or, like, if he only heard the message after he was already raised by the Kents, what would he think of, Um, it's interesting. I like that change. It's definitely makes you think. Um, so this leads to most citizens in his general vicinity like immediately like turning on him. Like a guy's like, "Oh, screw Superman now," and throws a thing against his head, which kind of reminds me of that Man of Steel scene where the guy at the bar or whatever throws the can at his head or whatever. Um, so Superman walks into a Stag Industry building, so that's a little kind of foreshadowing as well to the Metamorpho character. Um, I kind of think there was other Easter eggs in this movie too that I maybe just didn't spot upon my first viewing, but I did notice that one. So the Justice Gang come in, and Green Lantern covers the windows so that people cannot see in, and I like that little touch. Um, Mr. Terrific says that he can verify that the video had not been faked, or he's like, Lex is careful. His team would not have leaked that video if someone, like me could have picked it apart and proved that it was faked or whatever. He's like, so it's real. And then I forget the dialogue here, but Guy Gardner kind of bows up to Superman and, dares him to take a swing. He's like, take a swing at me, Big Blue, or something like that. But then Hot Girl asks, how did Lex Luthor get the video in the first place? And this makes Superman, realize that he needs to go check on the Fortress of Solitude, because where else could Lex have gotten it? So Superman rushes to the fortress, and he finds a damaged robot, the one played by Alan Tudyk, and the robot, tells him what happened, and then he realizes that Crypto was taken. So Superman breaks into Lex Luthor's building and demands that he give him his dog back. And, Luthor just keeps denying it. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he like takes a sip of coffee or something. And I forget exactly what he says, but he's, Superman, he basically admits it to Superman. So now Superman, explodes in anger on him, but all the cameras are catching it. So now, to the general public, Superman looks even more unhinged. So Superman goes back to Lois's apartment and has a talk with her. And he says he is sorry they fought. And he asks why she said it would never work. And she's like, I'm just a punk rock girl from wherever. And you're this guy that's always optimistic and you always see the best in everyone. And then I love this line. Superman says, well, maybe that's the new punk rock. I really liked that line. Kudos to James Gunn. I thought that was kind of my favorite line of the movie. This idea that being a decent person has become being an uncynical person has become so rare and so against the grain that that's the new punk rock. I like that notion. It's cool. I really like that line. He also has a line where he mentions like, "Hey, I was a punk rock kid. I like this band called the Crab Joys," and Lois is like, "That's not a real punk rock band. That's a pop band, And there'll be another little throwback to that here in a bit. Superman tells Lois that he's going to turn himself into the government who now want him after hearing the video and seeing his blow up with Lex and all this. But he's primarily doing it so he can find where they are keeping Crypto. And Lois is like, you have a dog? And he's like, yeah, he's not even a very good one. But he's probably alone and scared, so I need to find him. Again, seems very Superman, right? Before he leaves, he tells Lois that he loves her and that he should have told her earlier. So Superman turns himself in, and he gets handcuffed by Ultraman. Again, it's kind of amazing the parallels between this and Man of Steel, because Man of Steel, you also get the famous scene of Superman in handcuffs. Superman tells Rick Flag Sr. that they did not read him his rights. And Rick Flag Sr. says that the government can basically considers him an illegal alien and that he has no rights. He says because he is so powerful, they are outsourcing his interrogation and confinement to Lex Luthor's company, Planetside. So Superman is taken to that, camp we saw earlier where, the Bolivarian hammer, who is really Ultraman, walked through the boom tube type thing. And so now he's forced to walk through that tube, but he lands inside a prison cell alongside Metamorpho. Lex Luthor is there to greet Superman and has what looks to be a white Martian working for him that like moves his cell through this pocket dimension he's created. And there's even because Lex I think refers to him as a Martian or something. And he's like, I'm a Kryptonian. And he's like, yeah, whatever. And then it kind of instantly pans over to that character. So I'm like, oh, that's what kind of made me think that maybe it's a white Martian. So, and also, I found it interesting, Lex creates his pocket dimension as a prison. And so this is basically kind of like a version of the Phantom Zone in a way. I think that's what Gunn was going for. This is kind of a new version of a Phantom Zone, seemingly. But again, that's a change to the lore as well, because now this is created by Lex Luthor. So they pass by Crypto, who is like in this containment field, and this is a bit silly but cute enough where they make him feel like he's flying after like squirrels that can fly or something. Also a bit silly is Luthor has a bunch of like brainwashed monkeys that basically stir up hatred on social media about Superman, which I'm like, it's comic booky, I guess, but a little bit silly. And then we see that Lex is not only imprisoning bad people, but also people who are just like political protesters. Geez, where have we seen this before? I kind of wonder if they did some reshoots and maybe not. Again, I'm just surprised how close it is to world events, but I think for the most part it would have been shot before some of those things. So I don't know. Might just be a coincidence, but it works. There's also like this woman that's like an ex of Lex's that wrote a blog about him he didn't like or something like that. Point is, he has people there that don't belong there, right? And they also have Metamorpho's son in a prison cell across the way, and they are threatening to hurt his son if he does not do what they want. So Lex forces Metamorpho to use his powers, and so he turns his fist into kryptonite, to keep Superman weak. Now, I will say this also differs from the comic book. I believe in the comics, Metamorpho can only turn into elements that are found within the human body, but here he can turn into any element, which it's a cooler power, to be honest, and I like how they use it here. Superman tells Metamorpho that if he turns off the kryptonite, he's fast enough to save his son. But I think Metamorpho is scared and he doesn't really believe him, so he's just like, don't talk to me, and he keeps the kryptonite going. Back at the Daily Planet, Lois is trying to figure out what Lex Luthor is up to. She notices that Lex has given a lot of weapons to Bolivaria, but for a very cheap price. She's like, he's given him like $80 billion worth of weapons, and they've paid him like, $1.6 billion or something. So he's like, what's going on here? So now, okay, this next thing, it's cute and it's kind of funny, but at the same time, a little unrealistic. So Jimmy gets a text from a source of his, who in his phone context is listed under mutant toes. So we're going to find out that he had a past relationship with Miss Tessmacher, who works for Lex and, super attractive and everything. And I think James Gunn missed an opportunity here in that we never see the mutant toes. Like, I'm guessing she just has that index toe that's much longer than the big toe, which is always weird. But I think and I'm not a Quentin Tarantino foot pervert guy, but I think we should have seen those gross toes, just as a payoff to the joke. Anyway, his source tells him that Superman is being held in a pocket dimension created by Lex Luthor. So Lois goes to visit the Justice Gang to tell them what she learned. And Guy Gardner is very sloppy with. She's like, "Oh, you know Superman? Oh, then do you also know that he's Clark Kent?" So he's like very sloppy with Clark's secret identity, and she's like, "Yeah, I do know, and it's a good thing. Like, are you that way with everybody? So Mr. Terrific says he put tracking devices in Superman's bloodstream, and so he could tell exactly where he disappeared into this pocket dimension. And she's like, "You put the trackers in his bloodstream?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I do that to everybody." And like the others are like, what is a gag there? So, Guy Gardner tells Lois, basically that they don't want to risk getting involved in an international incident with the whole Bolivaria conflict. So he's like, I'm out. And Lois is like, "Are you all good with that?" And like, Hot Girl's just like reading a newspaper, she feels the same way. And seemingly, it seems like Mr. Terrific does as well. However, on her way out of the building, Mr. Terrific has second thoughts and decides to help her. He reveals that he made a hovercraft, and there's this whole joke where, like, the garage door to open up the hovercraft is like super duper slow, and she's like, "Really? You made a whole hovercraft, but you couldn't make a garage door that opens faster?" And he's like, "I'm working on it," or something like that. So they fly over to the base where Superman was taken. At some point, I might be getting the order of events here somewhat mixed up, but at some point, Jimmy meets with his secret contact, who I mentioned ends up being Miss Tessmacher. It turns out they used to date, but Jimmy is like very turned off by her, both by her toes and that she's just like seems like an airhead. Jimmy pretends like he might get back with her if she finds information for him about Lex. But this upsets her, and she's like, "Oh, you just want information on Lex. You don't really want me." And Jimmy's like, "No, it's not that way," but she storms off. So Superman wakes up in bad condition in his cell, and is greeted by Lex Luthor and the leader of Bolivaria, I guess the Netanyahu of this movie. And he was also shown earlier. I didn't really talk about it because I didn't think it was super relevant. And he also has like a boom tube that goes to the pocket dimension where he can talk with Lex Luthor. So what Lex Luthor does is he puts a gun to the head of like this food vendor that that Superman has been seen talking to in the past and is friendly with. And he plays a game of Russian roulette. And basically, anytime Superman doesn't answer one of his questions, he pulls the trigger. And his second question, I forget what his first was, but his second question is, "Who are your adopted parents on Earth?" Superman, of course, can't answer that. So he pulls the trigger, and on the second one, kills this guy. I think this might be the only innocent civilian shown killed in this movie, actually. But this, not only upsets Superman, but it causes Metamorpho to break down and cry. So, you see that Metamorpho here has a lot of heart, and he's like, now having second thoughts about what he's doing. Oh, and before he leaves, Lex tells Superman, maybe next time I'll bring back that reporter you're always chummy with. What's his name? Clark Kent. And I don't think this was like a wink wink that Lex knows the secret identity. I think it was saying that Lex still, smart as he is, hasn't figured out that Clark Kent is Superman. I've always liked that too. That I want to say, I don't know if it's a television adaptation or a comic, but I know I saw something once where or read, it's all jumbled in my mind, where Lex finally figures out that Clark is Superman. And he just can't get past it. Why, if you have all this power, would you pretend to be this stumbly bumbly idiot? He can't fathom, because if he had that power, he would use it. And he would not be this way, and he just couldn't fathom someone with that much power, putting on this charade. So Mr. and Terrific finally arrive at the planet-side base, and this is another action scene I really liked. So Mr. Terrific puts Lois in a protective sphere, and while he does that, he takes out all the soldiers at the base with his T-spheres and all of his gimmicks, and it was just a really well choreographed action scene. I really thought it was done well. So they open up the gateway in the boom tube to the pocket dimension, but Mr. Terrific says if they go in, they will be destroyed. And he mentions how Lex creating this pocket dimension was very dumb, because it could very easily turn into a black hole and destroy the entire Earth. The only thing is here, I'm like, other people... it seems like maybe leaving the door open here is the most dangerous thing, but maybe he fears if they actually go inside, the door will shut and they'll get blocked in. I don't know. But it seems like, he thinks if they just go in, they're going to end up getting crushed to death. So he's like, we got to stay here at the entrance. He mentions that this was some scientific gobbledygook here. He's like, oh, look, that's a proton river. And that's very dangerous. Getting sucked into that would be very, very dangerous. But it's just like this made up thing. I mean, I guess it kind of looks cool. It's this colorful river, but it's just got, I don't know, a proton river. Okay. So yeah, he sends out some of his spheres, T-spheres, to look for Superman. So Metamorpho feels bad for Superman, and after what he just saw, so he decides to help Superman. So he turns off the kryptonite, but then he's like, why do you still look so bad? Why are you still messed up? And Superman's like, I'll be fine once I get the sun. But Metamorpho's like, there's no sun in here. But then he's like, maybe there could be. So he somehow uses his powers. He mixes hydrogen and something, and basically creates a small artificial sun, which heals Superman enough, not all the way, but enough to where he can break out of the cell and save Metamorpho's son. So Metamorpho says, when he's going through his changes, he's not corporeal enough to hold on to his son, so he wants Superman to hold on to his son while they get out. So Metamorpho basically uses most of his body to turn into a propellant, and so he's basically just a flying head. And so I think that's why he couldn't hold on to his son. So Superman breaks Krypto out, but then is instantly attacked by a bunch of Lex Luthor's flying henchmen. Again, I think he calls them raptors or something like that. Metamorpho helps take out some of the bad guys by he creates acid and like spits that on him, so that was kind of a cool thing. Shows off his powers. But then Superman is knocked into the Proton River, which has deep gravity, and so he's stuck. He calls for Crypto, but that doesn't end up helping because again, Crypto is kind of kind of dumb, and so then they all kind of end up getting sucked in. They're heading for this gravity well that I guess is kind of like a black hole that will kill them. But with the help of Metamorpho and Superman using his super breath, he is able to create enough propulsion to get them out of the gravity well. So then Mr. Terrific finds him with his T-sphere, and he says, follow my sphere. And of course, Crypto sees it as a ball, so he chases it, and Superman's like, no, Crypto, don't destroy that. So basically, they all follow the sphere, and they get out of the tube just in the nick of time. Gravity collapses everything. And of course, Crypto eats Mr. Terrific's T-spheres. And he's like, no, those are expensive. Again, anytime Crypto is used here, it's always very kind of adorable and funny. Metamorpho tells them that Superman has kryptonite poisoning. That's what's wrong. So Mr. Terrific tells Lois that he will be okay in a couple days. He just needs more sunlight and all that. So Lois, Mr. Terrific allows Lois to use his hovercraft, and he's like, the controls are very intuitive. But she does almost hit a tree or something on the way out. But anyway, it's intuitive enough that she flies it all the way to Smallville, Kansas, to Ma and Pa Kent's farm. So Lex Luthor is now irate that Superman escaped, and he's breaking cups and stuff and making all of his people pick it up, and even throws something at Miss Teschmacher and yells at her. So she is so upset that she goes in a closet and calls Jimmy and tells her that she has information that can bring Lex down, and she's going to send it to him. Now Ultraman overhears her tell Jimmy this, and him and Lex almost stop her, but she's able to send the information to Jimmy right in the nick of time. So that information appears to be just a bunch of selfies of her, which it mostly is, but it ends up being more than that. So the Kents take care of Clark while Lois looks around his room, and she sees the poster of this fake punk rock band, the Crab Joys, which was that band that Clark likes. Lois gets a call from Jimmy, and Jimmy sends the information that he just received from Miss Teschmacher. And so Lois is looking through these, and she's like, first of all, good for you, Jimmy, for hooking up with this lady or whatever. She's hot. But then she looks in the background of these photos, and in one of them, she finds a picture and finds out that Lex's plan is once Bolivaria takes over this other country, he is going to get half of it. And I think he calls it Luthoria or something, which it's kind of funny that in the original 78 Superman, his big plan revolved around real estate. And now it's basically the same thing. Something about Lex Luthor and real estate is a common theme, I guess. So once she finds that out, she wants to get back to Metropolis to write the story. So she heads back to Metropolis. So Lex decides to open the gate to the pocket dimension at that camp, which will cause a big rift to develop and get Superman's attention, which will then distract him from the war that's kicking up in Bolivaria again. So Mr. Terrific is still at that camp, that planet-side camp, and he witnesses the beginning of the rift. Clark wakes up in bed and finds Crypto sleeping on his chest, looking out for him, which was a very cute scene, I have to admit. I like that. He has a very heartfelt conversation with his dad. His dad tells, because Clark's like feeling lost after seeing the full video of his Jor-El and Lara, and he's like, "This changes everything." And his dad's like, "Hey, Clark, parents aren't made to tell their children what they are. They give them the tools to find out who they are for themselves." And I really liked that conversation between him and his dad. I thought it was very heartfelt. I felt it was emotionally affecting. I thought it worked good dialogue. Um, all of a sudden, Clark's mom shows up and tells him to come see the report on the TV, which reveals that Bolivaria is gearing up to attack. Again, I forget the name of that neighboring country. But hey, Israel's gearing up to attack Palestine again, basically. So Clark wants to go prevent that war again, but he gets a call from Mr. Terrific, who explains that a rift is going to eat Metropolis and then the whole Earth if he doesn't show up. So, he's got to have his priorities and go after this rift now. So the people of Metropolis are given an evacuation order, and then the rift shows up and starts, basically breaking the whole city in half. It's breaking buildings in half, breaking streets in half. Here's my thing. Okay, they call this evacuation order, and they show all these people leaving. That's all good. But let's be honest. There's a lot of people who either would have refused to listen to that evacuation order, or maybe were old or in bad shape and couldn't adhere to the evacuation order. So, again, this is a spot where they're telling us, oh, don't worry, nobody's dying in all this destruction. But logically, a lot of people are dying in that destruction. It's funny because Man of Steel was berated by critics for that final fight where so much damage occurs in the city. And that same type of damage is happening in this movie. It's just we're meant to believe that all those buildings are empty, all the streets are empty, but logically that is just not true. So I think this movie in this respect is probably going to get a pass that Man of Steel didn't, but it's okay. At the same time, Bolivaria is gearing up to attack their neighboring country, which has compromised the people with only small weapons to defend themselves. Again, where have we seen this before? Rocks thrown at tanks type of thing, Some of the kids on the, again, I'm going to say Palestine side because I don't remember the name of that country. They make a Superman flag, and this was seen in one of the trailers as well. And they raise it, and everyone starts chanting Superman, Superman, hoping that Superman will show up and save them again. We see short scenes of the members of the Justice Gang and Metamorpho all see what's going on in that country on television. Lois tells Perry White about the evidence she found against Luthor, and he gives her the green light to write the article. So I guess to get out of the way of the rift, or the whole news team gets on Mr. Terrific's hovercraft, and while they're flying around the city, Lois dictates her story while Jimmy types it out. So now we cut to a building is falling over, and it's about to kill a woman on a bridge whose car has stalled. But Superman shows up at the very last second and rescue her, stops the building from falling on her. And this is where we get that big John Williams sting that was in the trailers. But right after that, Superman and Mr. Terrific are immediately attacked by Ultraman and the Engineer in like a baseball or football stadium. Mr. Terrific is quickly knocked out, and then the other two begin fighting with Superman. Superman holds his own for a while, and there's even this kind of cool thing because he kind of figures out that he can basically be because of the Engineer's power, he's not going to kill her. So he basically uses her as kind of a nunchuck and swings her at the Ultraman, which is kind of a cool scene. But eventually they knock him down, and then Lex orders the engineer to use her nanites to basically suffocate him to death. This is kind of dark. So her nanites cover his face completely, his eyes completely, and they go into his lungs and fill up his lungs. So basically, they're just trying to choke him out and suffocate him to death. One thing I'll say is, one of the common criticisms about Superman is he's too powerful. And I do agree with that. But Superman, the animated series, did this right, too, by the way. It's like, if a being is powerful enough, basically like Superman, they can beat him to death. And so, that's something that's shown in this movie that hey, he is beatable and you can hurt him. So I liked that James Gunn, made him feel vulnerable. So out of desperation, Superman flies into space and then falls all the way back down to Earth and crashes into the Earth in order to shake off the engineer and Ultraman. And then he basically vomits out all the nanites so he can breathe again. So the engineer is knocked out, although they do make sure to mention one of Lex's guys is like, she's not dead, she's just knocked out. So the engineer ... will return. But Ultraman, he does get up, and Ultraman's mask comes off, and it is revealed that he is a clone of Superman. And Superman puts it together. This is how Lex got into the Fortress of Solitude, because the Fortress is DNA locked, but hey, he has his DNA. And Lex says, yeah, he, would go to Superman fight where you fight monsters or whatever, and he eventually got a lock of his hair or his DNA. But Lex mentions that this Superman clone is even dumber than he is, so, which is basically saying, hey, this is our version of Bizarro. So they worked Bizarro into this movie. Now, I don't think Bizarro is that interesting of a character, so I hope they don't bring him back in a subsequent movie. But if this was just a nod to Bizarro here, and I'm good with it. Lex then gives Ultraman more of his commands on how to beat Super, like the 5A, BC, that sort of thing. As they are fighting, I don't remember all of his dialogue here, but Lex basically explains to Superman, why he hates him, how he put this plan together to beat him, and how brains always beat brawn. And so Superman, keeps getting beat by Ultraman, but eventually Superman tells him. By the way, I should mention that Lex has been monitoring this whole fight with these flying cameras that are revolving around Superman and the whole thing. But Superman tells him that he's right. Brains does defeat brawn, and that's when he whistles for Krypto. So Krypto shows up and he's like, "Hey, boy, get the toys." And so Krypto starts taking out all of Lex's cameras. And so now Ultraman isn't hearing all of Lex's commands, and this allows Superman to get the upper hand and beat Ultraman. And he eventually, basically, Superman lines it up so it gets hit by a bus, and Ultraman gets slash Bizarro gets shoved into like the gravity well. Again, hopefully that means we're through with that character. We don't need him again. But who knows? Maybe Gunn will write. Maybe he'll end up somehow going to Earth 3 and getting smarter and literally becoming Ultraman. Who knows? So Mr. Terrific shows up and tells Superman that they need to go to LexCorp because the code to close the rift will be there. But then at that point, a bunch of Luthor's flying men, again, I think they're called Raptors or something, they show up. But Superman, he easily beats these guys beats the hell out of him in the sky, and then this was a scene in the trailer where he does like the circles with the heat vision and just takes these guys down, and then it's rain and men, all these guys falling down. But a part of me is like, again, we're to believe none of these guys die because they're in these, like, okay, they're in these metal suits. They're flying at terminal velocity and splatting against the ground. You're telling me that they're okay? I think those guys are just like pulverized sacks of blood inside those suits. It's kind of like when Iron Man gets hit really hard, but he's in the suit, and we're like, oh, he's okay. It's like, no, he's probably not. So Superman ends up busting into LexCorp and knocking Lex down while Mr. Terrific works on closing the rift. And so Superman gives Lex this scene I don't know about. This was almost like a it felt a little heavy-handed to me. Superman gives Lex this big speech on how his humanity is his greatest strength, and he feels joy and pain, and makes mistakes like humans, and this is what makes him grow and become better, and all this sort of stuff. And it's like it's an okay speech, but it seemed a little preachy. I don't know. It just seemed a little forced, this speech here. Not that the content of it was bad. It just, I don't know. It's the one scene of Superman being Superman in this movie where I'm like, maybe he's being a little too much Superman at this point. I don't know. It's just a little saccharine, maybe. I don't know. Okay. So then Lex kind of bows up at Superman again. But this is where Krypto shows up, and he beats Superman, or beats up, like, grabs onto Lex and kind of just like throws him all around the room, like bounces him off of tables and stuff, and really like beats him up. And Superman looks at him and is like, dude, like, again, that sort of thing. I think he should have just said like good boy or something. There should have been an alt line there, maybe. Mr. Terrific is able to close the rift and save the day, and I wrote, even though I'm sure a lot of people died and trillions of dollars in damage was done. So they better the government better be able to seize Lex Luthor's money to pay for all the damages here. So Lex Luthor is apprehended, and it's mentioned that he will be taken to Belle Rev prison. So they're definitely kicking that storyline down the road. You got to imagine that Amanda Waller / Rick Flag Sr. might have plans for him. Oh, I should also mention, I forget exactly where it was. Maybe when Superman went to visit Lois at her apartment. But there was a scene of Peacemaker talking on a late night kind of Fox News type TV show, talking trash about Superman. And it seems like this Peacemaker season, they're teasing that Peacemaker from Peacemaker season 1 is going to a different dimension where he meets a different Peacemaker. I'm guessing this is the other Peacemaker. The Peacemaker we know probably ends up taking his place or something along those lines. Lois shows up, and Superman asks her if she would like an interview with him, and she says yes. And she's like, let's go over to this nearby building. They go in there, and they have a scene where Superman flies with her in his arms, and she tells him that she loves him too, and they have a kiss. Perry tells Jimmy that he knew that Lois and Superman were like a thing. So we don't totally bury Perry White, I guess. He's perceptive. Superman goes back to the fortress, and the robots once again help him to heal. While he is healing, his cousin Supergirl shows up. And we find out that she is kind of wild and also the owner of Crypto, and that is why Crypto is so rambunctious and misbehaves. So I kind of like that detail, and I think they did set that up where I think Clark did mention somewhere earlier on that he's like, it's not really my dog, I'm just watching him or something like that. And then this reveal happens. So we get just a taste of Millie Alcott as Supergirl here. And I gotta say, I mean, it's not necessarily enough to go on, but I'm like, she showed a lot of personality here, so I'm definitely up for this Supergirl movie they're cooking up. Which I think is already either shot or shooting currently. So I think that's supposed to come out next year. Superman mentions that she likes to go to places that have a red sun so that she is able to get drunk because apparently under the yellow sun, their metabolism is so fast that they're unable to get drunk. Kind of like Captain America mentions in, I think, the first Captain America movie. The robots ask Clark if he would like them to play a recording of his parents because they're like, oh, it calms him down. And he's like, yes, that sounds good. But this time, however, the recordings are all of Ma and Pa Kent. Kind of all the family home videos that were taken over the years with them, with Clark as a child. And the movie ends with a video of Pa Kent holding up like a 2-year-old Clark, in the air as though he's flying. And I thought that was a very good note to go out on. A nice touch by James Gunn, I thought. We do get both a mid-credit stinger and an end-credit stinger, but they're both kind of, both kind of nothings, just kind of cutesy ones. So, in the mid-credit stinger, Clark is like Superman is on the moon, kind of watching Earth, and Crypto is kind of like hugging him. Basically, he's holding Crypto. A cute little scene. And then in the end-credit stinger, Superman accidentally angers Mr. Terrific by telling him, like Mr. Terrific apparently like tried to put back together one of the buildings that were rifted in half, and he's like, "There's still a visible crack there." And Mr. Terrific's like, "Come on, man," or whatever he says, and he leaves, and Clark is basically like, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I can be so insensitive at times," or something along those lines. Again, kind of a silly. Unnecessary scene, but a little something for the people that stayed behind after the credits. But guys, overall, I thought this movie had a lot of heart. I think the core of the movie, like I said, is Lois and Clark, and they got them right. I would have liked to seen a little more Lois. The thing I have with Lois is, like, I feel like the day would have still been saved kind of without her. And I don't know, I always like Lois to, I always like it to feel like she plays a bigger role in saving the day using her brains, where Superman, she has the brains to Superman's brawn, that sort of thing. Or maybe she, I mean, I guess she does use journalism to help bring Lex Luthor down, which I do like that aspect of. But again, I miss the chase when it comes to their romance. We're just kind of in it, and like they had their spat at the beginning, and now it's seemingly all fixed. But I don't know. I want to see a little more romance, a little more flirtation between those two in the future. So James Gunn, get on it. But no, overall, kudos to James Gunn. I think overall, a really good script, a bit expository at times, maybe a little saccharine at times, but overall, very enjoyable. And yeah, guys, thumbs up. See this movie. I think we got a good kickoff here to this new DCU, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But guys, what did you guys think? Please, if you will, comment down below and let me know what you thought of the film. Yeah, guys, it was kind of a longer episode. I hope you enjoyed it. But that'll do it. I do want to say, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please leave comments. Please give me a thumbs up. please leave me positive reviews in whatever podcast service you use. And also, if you like, you can follow me on social media, either on Twitter at Zach Jones Live, ZachJonesLive, or over on Blue Sky at Enjoying the Review. But guys, until next time, I hope you're enjoying the review. Bye, guys.